Marcus Aurelius was Emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD and is known as the last good emperor. Emperor Antonius Pius adopted Marcus and his brother Lucius Verus upon the death of their father. Both Marcus and Lucius took emperorship jointly, also with Pius's natural son, Commodus. Marcus outlived both Lucius and Commodus. Aurelius is considered a Stoic, a school of philosophy founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens in the 3rd century BC, and also is heavily influenced by the ethical teachings of Socrates. The residue of this thinking is clearly apparent in the words of Aurelius. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, adapted for the contemporary reader by James Harris, read by Oliver Newton. Book 1. From my grandfather Verus I learned good morals, and to govern my temper. From memory and the reputation of my father, modesty and a manly character. From my mother, belief, generosity, and abstinence, not only from evil deeds, but also from evil thoughts, and further, simplicity in my way of living, far removed from the habits of the rich. From my great-grandfather, not to attend public schools, but instead to have had good teachers at home, and to know that on such things a man should be willing to spend. From my governor, neither to be in favour of the Green nor the Blue party, to be neutral and free from bias. From him I also learned the endurance of labour, and to want little, and to work with my own hands, not to meddle with other people's affairs, and not to listen to slander. From Diognetus, not to busy myself with unimportant things, and not to pay attention to what so-called miracle workers say about the ability to cast spells and drive away demons, not to breed quails for fighting, or involve myself passionately with such things, to enjoy freedom of speech, and to become intimate with philosophy, to listen first before speaking, to write dialogues in my youth, and to have little desire, simply a plank for a bed and a sheet. From Rusticus I received the impression that my character required improvement and discipline, and from him I learned not to be led astray by emulating others, nor to write on speculative matters, nor to deliver speeches which drive people to pointless action, nor to show myself off as a man who practices much discipline, or does kind acts in order to make a display, to abstain from persuasive speech and poetry and fine writing, not to walk about in the house in my outdoor clothes, to write my letters with simplicity, like the letter which Rusticus wrote from Sinuessa to my mother. With respect to those who have offended me by words, or done me wrong, to be free as anger as soon as they have shown a readiness to reconcile, to read carefully, and not to be satisfied with a superficial understanding of a book, nor to hastily give my approval to those who talk too much. I am indebted to him for being acquainted with the discourses of Epictetus, which he communicated to me out of his own collection. From Apollonius I learned freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose, and to look to nothing else, not even for a moment, except to reason, and to be always the same, even in sharp pains, on the occasion of loss, or in long illness. But I also saw clearly in him that the same man can be both most unwavering and yielding, without being weak in giving his instruction, and to have had before my eyes a man who clearly considered his experience and his skill in presenting philosophical principles to be the smallest of his merits. And from him I learned how to receive from friends esteemed favours without being humbled by them, or letting them pass unnoticed. From Sextus a kind character, and the example of a family governed in a fatherly manner, and the idea of living conformably to nature, to look carefully after the interests of friends, and to tolerate ignorant people who form opinions without consideration. He had the power of readily accommodating himself to all, so that the communication with him was more agreeable than any flattery, and at the same time he was most highly respected by those who associated with him, and he had the faculty both of discovering and ordering, in an intelligent and methodical way, principles necessary for life, and he never showed anger or any other passion, but was entirely free from passion, and also most affectionate, and he could always express approval without noisy display, and he possessed much knowledge without pretension. From Alexander the grammarian, to refrain from finding fault, and not in a disapproving manner scold those who utter false words or strange-sounding expressions, but to introduce the very expression which should have been used, and by way of answering or giving confirmation, to join in an inquiry about what was said, not about the word. From Fronto, I learned to observe what envy and duplicity and hypocrisy are in a tyrant, and that generally those among us are rather deficient in fatherly affection. From Alexander, to form platonic relationships, not frequently or without necessity express that I have no leisure, nor to neglect duties required by alleging urgent occupations. From Catullus, not to be indifferent when a friend finds fault, even if he should find fault without reason, but to try to restore him to his usual disposition, and to be ready to speak well of teachers, and to love my children truly. From my brother Severus, to love my family, and to love truth, and to love justice. And from him I received the idea of a civil process in which there is the same law for all, a process administered with regard to equal rights and equal freedom of speech, and the idea of a kingly government which respects most of all the freedom of the governed. I learned from him also consistency and undeviating steadiness in my regard for philosophy, and a disposition to do good, and to give to others readily, and to cherish good hopes, and to believe that I am loved by my friends. And in him I observed no concealment of his opinions with respect to those whom he condemned, and that his friends had no need to wonder what he wished or did not wish. It was clear to see. From Maximus I learned self-government, and not to be led aside by anything, and cheerfulness in all circumstances, as well as in illness, a just and moral character mixed with sweetness and dignity, and to do what was set before me without complaining. I observed that everybody believed that he thought as he spoke, and that in all that he did he never had any bad intention, and he never showed amazement and surprise, and was never in a hurry, and never put off doing a thing. He was never confused or depressed, he never laughed to disguise his vexation, and he was never passionate or suspicious. He was accustomed to do acts of kindness, and was ready to forgive, and was free from all falsehood, and he presented the appearance of a man who could not be diverted from doing right. I observed, too, that no man could ever think that he was despised by Maximus, or ever venture to think himself a better man. He had also the art of being humorous in an agreeable way. In my father I observed mildness of temper, and an unchangeable resolution of the things which he had determined after due deliberation, and no excessive pride in those things which men call honours, and a love of labour and perseverance, and a readiness to listen to those who had anything to propose for the commonwealth, an undeviating firmness in giving to every man knowledge derived from experience of various occasions, through vigorous action. And I observed that he had overcome all childish passion, and he considered himself no more than any other citizen, and he released his friends from all obligation to attend with him when he went abroad, and those who had failed to accompany him, by reason of any urgent circumstance, always found him the same. I observed too his habit of careful inquiry in all matters of deliberation, and his persistency, and that he never stopped his investigation through being satisfied with appearances which first present themselves, and that his disposition was to keep his friends, and not to be soon tired of them, not to be extravagant in his affection, and to be satisfied on all occasions and cheerful, and to foresee things a long way off, to provide for others without display, and to check immediately for popular applause and flattery, and to be ever watchful over the things which were necessary for the administration of the empire, and to be a good manager of the expenditure, and patiently to endure the blame which he got for such conduct. And he was neither superstitious with respect to the gods, nor did he court men by gifts, or by trying to please them, or by flattering them. Instead, he showed steadiness in all things, and never any mean thoughts or action, nor love of novelty. The things which bring about the commodity of life, and of which fortune gives an abundant supply, he used without arrogance and without excusing himself, so that when he had them, he enjoyed them without pretension, and when he didn't have them, he did not want them. Everyone acknowledged him to be a ripe man, perfect, above flattery, able to manage his own and other men's affairs. Besides this, he honored those who were true philosophers, and he did not express disappointment with those who pretended to be philosophers, nor was he easily led by them. He was also easy in conversation, and he made himself agreeable without any offensive pretension. He took a reasonable care of his body, not as one who was greatly attached to life, or out of regard to personal appearance, or in a careless way, but so that through his own attention he very seldom was in need of the physician's art or medicine. He was most ready to give way without envy to those who possessed any particular faculty, such as that of eloquence, or knowledge of the law, or of morals, or of anything else, and he gave them his help, that each might enjoy reputation according to his merit, and he always acted comfortably to the institutions of his country without showing any pretension of doing so. Further, he was not fond of change or unsteady, but he loved to stay in the same places and to occupy himself doing the same things, and after a headache he became immediately fresh and vigorous to his usual occupations. He had very few secrets, and these only about public matters, and he showed prudence and economy in the exhibition of public spectacles and the construction of public buildings, his donations to the people, and in such things, for he was a man who looked to what should be done, and not to the reputation which was to be gained by his acts. He did not take a bath at unusual hours. He was not fond of building houses, nor curious about what he ate, or about the texture and colour of his clothes. His dress came from Laurium, his villa on the coast, and from Lanuvium generally. We know how he behaved to the toll collector at Tusculum, who asked for his forgiveness. There was in him nothing harsh or unreasonable, or violent, or, as one may say, anything carried to the sweating point, but he examined all things carefully, as if he had abundance of time, and without confusion, in an orderly way, vigorously and consistently. And it can be applied to him that which is recorded about Socrates, that he was able both to abstain from and to enjoy those things which many are too weak to abstain from, and cannot enjoy without excess. But to be strong enough both to reject that which should be and to be sober is the mark of a man who has a perfect and invincible soul. To the gods I am indebted for having good grandfathers, good parents, and a good sister, good teachers, good associates, good kinsmen and friends, nearly everything good. Further, I owe it to the gods that I was not hurried into any offence against any of them, though I had a disposition which, if there were any opportunity, might have led me to do something of this kind, but, to their favour, there never was such an occurrence of circumstancing, making this possible. Further, I am thankful to the gods that I was not brought up by my grandfather's concubine, and that I preserved the flower of my youth, and that I did not prove my virility before the proper season, but even deferred the time, that I was subjected to a ruler and a father who was able to take away all pride from me, and to bring me to the knowledge that it is possible for a man to live in a palace without wanting either guards, or embroidered clothes, or torches and statues, and such like show. It's in a man's power to bring himself very near to the nature of a private person, without being mean in thought, or lacking care in action, with respect to the things which must be done for the public interest, in a manner that suits a ruler. I thank the gods for giving me such a brother, who was able by his moral character to rouse me to vigilance over myself, and who at the same time pleased me by his respect and affection, that my children have not been stupid, nor deformed in body, that I don't require more proficiency in rhetoric, poetry, and the other studies, in which I should perhaps have been completely engaged, as I had seen that I was making progress in them, that I had made haste to place those who brought me up in the position of honour, which they seemed to desire, without putting it off with the hope of doing it in some time later, that I received clear and frequent impressions about living in accordance to nature, and what kind of life that is, so that, so far as the gods and their gifts and help and inspirations, nothing hindered me from living according to nature, though I still fall short of it through my own fault, and through not observing the warnings of the gods. I may almost say their direct instructions, that my body has held out so long in such a kind of life, and that after having fallen into sexual passions I was cured, and though I was often out of humour, I never did anything of which I had reason to regret. And although it was my mother's fate to die young, she spent the last years of her life with me, that, whenever I wished to help any man in need, or on any other occasion, I was always in a position to do so, and that I never needed the favour returned, that I have such a wife, so obedient, and so affectionate, and so simple, that I had an abundance of good masters for my children, and that remedies have been shown to me in my dreams, and that when I had an inclination for philosophy, I did not fall into the hands of any particular teacher, and that I did not waste my time on writers of history, or in the discussion of assumed prepositions, or occupy myself about the appearance of heaven, for all these things require the help of the gods and fortune. Book 2. Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the meddling, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil. But I, who have seen the nature of the good, and that it is beautiful, and of the bad, that it is ugly, and the nature of him who does wrong, are still human like me, not only of the same blood or seed, but they participate in the same intelligence and the same portion of the divinity. I can neither be injured by any of them, for no one can fix on me what is ugly. I cannot be angry with my relations, or hate them, for we are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. To act against one another, then, is contrary to nature. What is it that I am? A little flesh and breath, and the ruling part. Forget your books for a moment. No longer distract yourself, but think as if you were now dying. Despise the flesh. 'Tis blood and bones, and a network, a contexture of nerves, veins, and arteries. See the breath also. What kind of a thing is his? Air, and not always the same, but every moment sent out and again sucked in. The third, then, is the ruling part. Consider this. You are an old man. No longer let yourself be a slave. No longer be pulled by the strings like a puppet to social movements. No longer either be dissatisfied with the present, or shrink from the future. All that is from the gods is full of providence. That which is from fortune is not separated from nature, or without an interweaving with the things which are ordered by providence. From there all things flow, and there is a part from necessity, and that which is for the advantage of the whole universe, of which you are a part. But that which is good for every part of nature, which the nature of the whole brings, and what serves to maintain this nature. Now the universe is preserved, as by the change of the elements, and by the changes of things compounded in the elements. Let these principles be enough for you. Let them always be fixed opinions. Remember how long you have been putting off things, and how often you have received an opportunity from the gods, and yet not use it. You must now at last perceive that you are part of the universe, and that the universe's existence is an efflux, and that a limit of time is fixed for you, which, if you do not use for clearing away the clouds from your mind, it will go, and you will go with it, and it will never return. Every moment you should think steadily as a Roman, and as a man to do what he must in hand with perfect and simple dignity, and a feeling of affection and freedom and justice. And you will give yourself relief, if you live your every act in life as if it were the last, laying aside all carelessness and passionate aversion from the commands of reason, and all hypocrisy and self-love, and discontent with the portion which has been given to you. You see how few the things are, of which, if a man has hold of, he is able to live a life which flows in quiet, and is like the existence of the gods. For the gods, on their part, will require nothing more from him who observes these things. Do wrong to yourself, do wrong to yourself, your soul, but you will no longer have the opportunity of honouring yourself. Every man's life is sufficient, but yours is nearly finished. And although your soul should revere itself, it also places its happiness in the souls of others. Do things from the external fall upon you and distract you? Give yourself time to learn something new and good, and cease to be whirled around. But then you must also avoid being carried about in any direction to learn. For there are also those who have wearied themselves in life by their activity, and yet have no object to which to direct every moment and movement, and in a word, all their thoughts. Through not observing what is in the mind of another, a man has rarely been seen to be unhappy. But those who do not observe the movements of their own minds must of necessity be unhappy. This you must always bear in mind. What is the nature of the whole, and what is my nature, and how this is related to that, and what kind of part it plays in the whole, and that there is no one who hinders you from always doing and saying the things which are according to the nature of which you are a part. Theophrastus, in his comparison of bad acts, such a comparison as one would make in accordance with the common notions of mankind, says, like a true philosopher, that the offences which are committed through desire are more blamable than those which are committed through anger. For he who is excited by anger seems to turn away from reason with a certain pain and unconscious contraction, but he who offends through desire, being overpowered by pleasure, seems to be in a manner more intemperate and more womanish in his offences. Rightly then, and in a way of philosophy, he said that the offence which is committed with pleasure is more blamable than that which is committed with pain. And on the whole, the one is more like a person who has been first wronged, and through pain is compelled to be angry, but the other is moved by his own impulse to do wrong, being carried towards doing something by desire. Since it is possible that you may depart from life this very moment, regulate every act and thought accordingly. To go away from men, if the gods exist, is not a thing to be afraid of, for the gods will not involve you in evil. But if, indeed, they do not exist, or if they have no concern about human affairs, what is it to me to live in a universe devoid of gods or devoid of providence? But in truth they do exist, and they do care for human things, and they have put all the means in man's power to enable him not to fall into real evils. And so to the rest, if there was anything evil, they would have provided for this also, that it should be altogether in a man's power not to fall into it. Now that which can make a man worse, can make a man's life worse through ignorance, not having the knowledge, and also not having the power to guard against or correct these things. Is it not possible that the nature of the universe has overlooked them? Nor is it possible that it has made so great a mistake. Good and evil happen indiscriminately to the good and the bad. Death, certainly, and life, honour and dishonour, pain and pleasure, all these things equally happen to good men and bad. Therefore, they are neither good nor evil. How quickly all things disappear in a universe that embodies them, but in time there is remembrance of them. It's important to note that nature of all things, and those things particularly which attract with the bait of pleasure, or terrify by pain, or lead abroad by fame, how worthless and contemptible and sordid and perishable and dead they are. It is a part of the intellectual faculty to observe the opinions and voices that give reputation, what death is, and the fact that if a man looks at himself, and by the abstractive power of reflection resolves the things which present themselves to the imagination, he will then consider it to be nothing else than an operation of nature. And if anyone is afraid of an operation of nature, he is a child. This, however, is not only an operation of nature, but it is also a thing which conduces to the purposes of nature. To observe, too, how a man comes near to the gods, and what part of him, and when this part of man is so dispossessed. Nothing is more wretched than a man who moves sideways in action and pries into the things beneath the earth, as the poet says, and seeks by conjecture what is in the minds of his neighbours, without perceiving that it is sufficient to view the thoughts within, and to attend to them sincerely. Reverence of the demon consists in keeping it pure from passion and thoughtlessness, and dissatisfaction with what comes from gods and men. For the things from the gods merit great respect for their excellence, and the things from men should be dear to us, and sometimes even, in a manner, they move our depression by reasons of men's ignorance of good and bad. Remember that no man loses any other life than that which he now lives, or lives any other than this which he now loses. For the present is the same to all, though that which perishes is not the same, and that which is lost appears to be a mere moment. For a man cannot lose either the past or the future, for what a man doesn't have, how can anyone take this from him? These two things you must bear in mind, the one, that all things from eternity are of like forms, and come round in a circle, and that it makes no difference whether a man shall see the same things during 100 years, or 200, or an infinite time, and the second, that the person to live the longest, and he who will die soonest, lose just the same. For the present is the only thing of which a man can be deprived, if it is true that this is the only thing which he has, and that a man cannot lose a thing that he doesn't have. The soul of man does violence to itself, first of all, when it becomes an abscess and, as it were, a tumour on the universe, so far as it can. For to be vexed at anything which happens is a separation of ourselves from nature. In the next place, the soul does violence to itself when it turns away from any man, or even moves towards him with the intention of injuring, such as are the souls of those who are angry. In the third place, the soul does violence to itself when it is overpowered by pleasure or pain. Fourthly, when it plays a part and does or says anything insincerely and untruly. Fifthly, when it allows any act of its own and any movement to be without any aim, and does anything thoughtlessly and without considering what it is, it being right that even the smallest things be done with reference to an end, and the end of the rational animal is to follow the reason and the law of the most ancient city and civil government. Of human life the time is a point, and the substance is in a flux, and the perception dull, and the composition of the whole body subject to putrefaction, and the soul a whirl, and fortune hard to divine, and fame a thing devoid of judgment. And to say, all in a word, everything which belongs to the body is a stream, and what belongs to the soul is a dream and vapour, and life is a warfare, and a stranger's temporary stay, and after fame is oblivion. What then is that which is able to conduct a man? One thing, and only one, philosophy. But this consists in keeping the demon within a man free from violence and unharmed, superior to pains and pleasures, doing nothing without purpose, or falsely with hypocrisy, not feeling the need of another man's doing or not doing anything, and besides, accepting all that happens, and all that is allotted, and finally, waiting for death with a cheerful mind, as being nothing else than a dissolution of the elements of which every living being is compounded. But if there is no harm to the elements themselves in each continually changing into another, why should a man have any apprehension about the change and dissolution of all the elements? For it is according to nature, and nothing is evil which is according to nature. Book 3. We should consider not only that our life is daily wasting away, and a smaller part of it is left, but another thing also must be taken into account, that if a man should live longer, it is quite uncertain whether his understanding will still continue sufficiently for the comprehension of things, and retain the power of contemplation which strives to acquire the knowledge of the divine and the human. For if he shall begin to fall into old age, perspiration and nutrition and imagination and appetite and whatever else there is of the kind will not fail, but the power of making use of ourselves and filling up the measure of our duty, and clearly separating all appearances, and considering whether a man should now depart from life, and whatever else of the kind, absolutely requires a disciplined reason, and this eventually becomes extinguished. We must make haste then, not only because we are daily nearer to death, but also because the conception of things and the understanding of them cease first. We should observe also that even the things which follow after the things which are produced according to nature contain something pleasing and attractive. For instance, when bread is baked, some parts are split at the surface, and these parts which open have a certain fashion contrary to the purpose of the baker's art, are beautiful in a manner, and in a peculiar way excite a desire for eating. And again, figs, when they are quite ripe, gape open, and in the ripe olives the very circumstance of their being near to rottenness adds a peculiar beauty to the fruit. And the ears of corn bending down, and the lion's eyebrows, and the foam which flows from the mouth of wild boars, and many other things, they are far from being beautiful, if a man should examine them severally, still, because they are fixed upon the things which are formed by nature, cannot help to admire them, and they please the mind. This man should have a feeling and deeper insight with respect to the things which are produced in the universe. There is hardly one of those which follow by the way of consequence, which will not seem to him to be in a manner not to give pleasure. And so he will see even the real gaping jaws of wild beasts with no less pleasure than those which painters and sculptors show by imitation. And in an old woman and an old man he will be able to see a certain maturity and beauty, and the attractive loveliness of young persons he will be able to look on with chaste eyes, and many such things will present themselves, not pleasing to every man, but to him only who has become truly familiar with nature and her works. Hippocrates, after curing many diseases himself, fell sick and died. The Chaldai foretold the deaths of many, and then fate caught them too. Alexander and Pompeius and Caesar, after so often completely destroying whole cities, and in battle cutting to pieces many tens of thousands of cavalry and infantry, themselves too, at last, departed from life. Heraclitus, after so many speculations of the fire of the universe, was filled with water internally, and died smeared all over with mud. And lice destroyed Democritus, and other lice killed Socrates. What does this mean? You have embarked, you have made the voyage, and you will come to shore. You too will cease to be held by pains and pleasures, and to be a slave to the vessel, which is as much inferior as that which serves it, which is superior. For the one is intelligence and deity, the other is earth and corruption. Do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others when you do not require these thoughts, for you lose the opportunity of doing something else when you have such thoughts as these. What is such a person doing, and why, and what is he saying, and what is he thinking of, and what he is contriving, and whatever else of the kind makes us wander away from the observation of our own ruling power. We should then check in the series of our thoughts everything that is without a purpose and useless, but most of all the over-curious feeling and the evil, and a man should use himself to think of those things only about which, if one should suddenly ask, "What are you thinking of?" with perfect openness could immediately answer this or that, so that from your words it should be plain that everything inside is simple and well-meaning, and one that cares not for thoughts about pleasure or sensual enjoyments at all, nor has any rivalry or envy and suspicion, or anything else for which you would blush if you say that you had it in your mind. For the man who is like this no longer delays being among best. He is like a priest and minister of the gods, using too the deity which is planted within him, which makes the man uncontaminated by pleasure, unharmed by any pain, untouched by any insult, feeling no wrong, a fighter in the noblest fight, one who cannot be overpowered by any passion, dyed deep with justice, accepting with all his soul everything which happens and is assigned to him as his portion, and not often, nor yet without great necessity and for the general interest, imagining what another says, or does, or thinks. For it is only what belongs to himself that he makes the matter for his activity, and he constantly thinks of that which is allotted to himself out of the sum total of things, and he makes his own acts fair, and he is persuaded that his own portion is good. For a lot which is assigned to each man is carried along with him, and carries him along with it. And he remembers also that every rational animal is his friend, and that to care for all men is according to man's nature, and a man should hold on to the opinion, not of all, but of those only who confessedly live according to nature. But to those who don't, he always bears in mind what kind of men they are, both at home and away from home, both by night and by day, and what they are, and with what men they live an impure life. Accordingly, he does not value at all the praise which comes from such men, since they are not even satisfied with themselves. Do not work unwillingly, nor without regard to the common interest, nor without due consideration, nor with distraction, nor let the studied material set off your thoughts, and not to be a man of many words, or busy about too many things. And further, let the God which is in yourself be the guardian of a living being, manly and of ripe age, and engaged in matter, a ruler who has taken his post like a man waiting for the signal which summons him from life, and ready to go, having need neither of promise nor of any man's testimony. Be cheerful also, and seek not external help, nor the tranquillity which others give. A man then must stand erect, not to be kept erect by others. If you find in human life anything better than justice, truth, temperance, fortitude, and in a word anything better than your own mind's self-satisfaction in the things which it enables you to do according to right reason, and in the condition that is assigned to you without your own choice, if you see anything better than this, turn to it with all your soul, and enjoy that which you have found to be the best. But if nothing appears to be better than the God which is planted in you, which has subjected to itself all your appetites, and carefully examines all the impressions, and as Socrates said, has detached itself from the persuasions of sense, and has submitted itself to the gods, and cares for mankind, if you find everything else smaller and of less value than this, give place to nothing else, for if you do once diverge and incline to it, you will no longer, without distraction, be able to give the preference to that good thing which is your proper possession, which you own. For it is not right that anything of any other kind, such as praise from the many, or power, or enjoyment of pleasure, should come into competition with that which is rationally and politically or practically good. All these things, even though they may seem to adapt themselves to the better things in a small degree, obtain the superiority all at once, and carry us away. But I say, simply and freely, choose the better and hold to it. That which is useful is the better. Well then, if it is useful to you as a rational being, keep to it. But if it is only useful to you as an animal, say so, and maintain your judgment without arrogance. Only take care that you make the inquiry by a sure method. Never value anything as profitable to yourself which shall compel you to break your promise, to lose your self-respect, to hate any man, to suspect, to curse, to act the hypocrite, to desire anything which needs walls and curtains, for he who has preferred intelligence and the worship of its excellence acts no tragic part, does not groan, will not need either solitude or much company, and what is best of all, he will live without either pursuing or flying from death, but whether for a longer or shorter time he shall have the soul enclosed in the body, for even if he must depart immediately, he will go as readily as if he were going to do anything else which can be done with decency and order, taking care of this only all through life, that his thoughts turn not away from anything which belongs to an intelligent man and a member of a civil community. In the mind of one who is chastened and purified, you will find no corrupt matter, nor impurity, nor any sore skin, nor is his life incomplete, when fate overtakes him, as one may say of an actor who leaves the stage before ending and finishing the play. Besides, there is in him nothing subservient, nor affected, nor too closely bound to other things, nor yet detached from other things, nothing worthy of blame, nothing which seeks a hiding place. Reverence, the faculty which produces opinion, on this faculty it entirely depends whether there shall exist in your ruling part any opinion inconsistent with nature and the constitution of the rational animal. And this faculty promises freedom from hasty judgment, and friendship towards men, and obedience to the gods. Throwing away then all things, hold to these only which are few, and besides bear in mind that every man lives only this present time, which is an indivisible point, and that all the rest of his life is either past or it is uncertain. Short then is the time which every man lives, and small the place on earth where he stands, and short too the longest occurring frame, and even this only continued by a succession of poor human beings who will very soon die, and who know not even themselves, much less him who died long ago. To the aids which have been mentioned let this one still be added. Make for yourself a definition or description of the thing which is presented to you, so as to see distinctly what kind of a thing it is in substance, in its nudity, in its complete entirety, and tell yourself its proper name, and the names of things of which it has been compounded, and into which it will be resolved. For nothing is so productive to the elevation of mind as to be able to examine methodically and truly every object which is presented to you in life, and always to look at things so as to see at the same time what kind of universe this is, and what kind of use everything performs in it, and what value everything has with reference to the whole, and what with reference to man, who is a citizen of the higher city, of which all other cities are like families, what each thing is, and of what it is composed, and how long is the nature of this thing to endure, which now makes an impression on me, and what virtue I have need of with respect to it, such as gentleness, manliness, truth, fidelity, simplicity, contentment, and the rest. On every occasion a man should say, this comes from God, and this is according to the appointment and spinning of the thread of destiny, and such like coincidence and chance, this is from the same. For this reason I behave towards it according to the natural law of fellowship, with benevolence and justice. At the same time, however, in things that I am indifferent to, I attempt to ascertain the value of each. If you work at that which is before you, following right reason seriously, vigorously, calmly, without allowing anything to distract you, but keeping your divine part pure, as if you should be bound to give it back immediately, if you hold to this, expecting nothing, fearing nothing, but satisfied with your present activity according to nature, and with heroic truth in every word and sound which you speak, you will live happy, and there is no man who is able to prevent this. As physicians always have their instruments and knives ready for cases which suddenly require their skill, so do you have principles ready for the understanding of things divine and human, and for doing everything, even the smallest, with a recollection of the bond which unites the divine and the human to one another. For neither will you do anything well which pertains to man, without at the same time having a reference to things divine, nor the contrary. No longer think deeply of the hazards, you will not see them in your future memoirs, nor the acts of the ancient Romans and Greeks, and the selection of books which you were reserving for your old age. Make haste to the end which you have before you, and throwing away idleness, come to your own aid, if you care at all for yourself, while it is in your power. Not everything is signified by words. Stealing, sowing, buying, keeping quiet, seeing what should be done, for this is not effected by the eyes, but by another kind of vision. Body, soul, intelligence. To the body belong sensations, to the soul, appetites, to the intelligence, principles. To receive impressions of forms by means of appearances belongs even to animals, but to be pulled by the strings of desires belongs both to wild beasts and to men who have made themselves into women. Those who do not believe in the gods, and who betray their country, and do their impure deeds when they have shut the doors, if then everything else is common to all that I have mentioned, there remains that which is found in the good man, to be pleased and content with what happens, and with the thread which is spun for him, and not to defile the divinity which is planted in his breast, nor disturb it by a crowd of images, but to preserve in tranquillity, following it obediently as a god, neither saying anything contrary to the truth, nor doing anything contrary to justice. And if all men refuse to believe that he lives a simple, modest, and contented life, he is neither angry with any of them, nor does he deviate from the way which he leads to the end of life, to which a man should arrive at pure, tranquil, ready to depart, and without any compulsion, perfectly reconciled to his part.